Sound check, 1, 2, 3. the one switch.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it. Takes a second, and now it's on. Connect. Okay.
Good morning, members. We'll commence in 30 seconds. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Good morning, everybody. First, let's acknowledge the fact we're on the unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. The peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people have lived here on this territory for millennia. Their culture, their presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. At this point, we have no regrets. I'll ask the committee coordinator, Kelly, to do the roll call today, please.
Councillor Bradley,
Here.
Councillor DeRose, Councillor DeRoche,
Here.
Councillor Devine,
Here.
Councillor Dudas,
Present.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor Johnson,
Here.
Councillor Lowe,
Here.
Councillor Luloff,
Good morning, Kelly and Mr. Chair.
Councillor Troster,
Here.
Vice Chair Kitts,
Here.
Chair, you have quorum.
Great. Thank you very much, Kelly. We have no declarations of interest. Confirmation of the minutes. I have to call them TRC in this one because it was TRC back then.
I'm hitting mute.
Test. There we go. So it was TRC back then. So TRC minute 16. 1 second. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, that should work now. Thanks, Councillor Devine. We'll figure it out. Yeah, and we got our pros coming down here. He might need a quick assistance here. We're all IT professionals here. Yeah, we're all sweating. So serious again. TRC minutes 16, November 28th, 2024. Is this item carried? Thank you. I'm just going to do agenda clearing. A lot of these items, Barnsdale Road widening, again, it's just a statement of work. There's no presentations, no speakers or correspondence on this item. Is this item carried? Thank you. Item number 5, the Finance and Corporate Services Department. We have a green fleet strategy. We do have a presentation. Thank you, Jennifer and Neil. So we'll hold that item. It's a very good one. They worked very hard on it. And I know they've met with many of our members. And we're excited to go over it with the public. I say it twice. That's how awesome it is. So we'll move along to item number 6. We have Councillor Bradley, Bank Street speed reduction. Looking at this item, there's no correspondence, no speakers. And so is this item carried? Thank you very much. We have the in-camera items, nothing listed. I'm going to be mildly unconventional today. Because I'm the chair and I do weird things. So we do have a motion by Councillor Johnson about community safety zones on Maitland Avenue. Councillor Johnson has agreed to help, and I'll make this very clear from the beginning. This will be the end of speed zone reduction support from myself and the vice chair go forward. We've seen many of these come through. These are historic. So I'd ask for committee's support on Councillor Johnson's new motion, withdrawing the old motion. But I do want to highlight, and if this is carried on agenda, I'd like to afford Councillor Johnson 2 minutes to speak to the great work she's done on this as well. Councillor Johnson. Yes, so whereas the right from the top there, perfect.
Okay. Whereas communities in both Ward 8, College, and Ward 3, Barrhaven West have raised concerns to their respective councillors of reckless and dangerous speeding along various stretches of roadway. Whereas both ward councillors intend to raise items to implement community safety zones in their wards as tools to help reduce speeds traveled along roadways in their communities. Therefore, be it resolved that Public Works and Infrastructure Committee recommend that Council approve designating community safety zones on Maitland Avenue between Highway 417 and Clyde, Larkin Drive between Carroll Court to Tripp Crescent, River Mist Road between Egret Way and Boddington Street, and on the two connected roads of Weybridge Drive between Chatham Gardens and Natick Gate, and Kennevale Drive between Hummingbird Crescent and Flanders Street. And be it further resolved that corresponding signage be installed as soon as practicable in 2025. So thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly about this stretch of Maitland.
Councillor, I just want to confirm, is this, first of all, is this item
Oh, thank
moved
you.
to the table? Is that carried?
Yeah.
Carried. And is this item carried? If so, then we'll get you to do a quick wrap up. If not, we'll hold it and put it onto the agenda. Is this item carried? Carried. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you for getting us in the right order of events there. So just to speak to the Maitland section between Highway 417 and Clyde Avenue, I want to, stress that we have worked to solve for this problematic stretch of road under the several policies. Maitland doesn't qualify for temporary traffic calming, nor does it qualify for neighborhood traffic calming because of the stretch of road being arterial. It's very close to a 417 on-ramp. And so behavior around this area, people will speed up trying to get onto the highway. But we do have a daycare there that serves 150 families. We have the single crossing from Copeland Park across Maitland to their school at Agincourt and Charlotte Lemieux. There's only one signalized intersection out of that community, and it is at a three-way intersection between Glenmount, Maitland, and Arundel. And so we have, around 75 to 100 families crossing there every morning and every evening on good weather days. And so there is a lot of physical children traffic going back and forth. A family car leaving a childcare center was struck by another vehicle as early as last week. And before Christmas, we had a daycare worker who was struck from behind when arriving to her place of work in front of all the families that were in the schoolyard. And it was very upsetting situation. Since elected, this neighborhood has begged me to try and find various solutions. Speeding in November 2022, which is the most recent speed study, the 85th percentile was 65 kilometers an hour, and the speed limit is 50. So we have a serious speeding problem that's 15 kilometers over the limit, and we don't have the tools in our toolbox. I'm trying to work with police to enforce in this area, but of course it can be very competitive. My hope is that the community safety zone will give the security and safety for those communities who desperately deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for your patience. I know it's unconventional to have people speak just on agenda clearing, but I know you put a tremendous amount of work and I want to thank you on that. So on to the additional item that was also here is Councillor Devine, road renewal budget. It's pretty belt and suspenders here as well. It's 2025 asset management strategy. It's been circulated. Is this item, first of all, allowed to meet the table? Is everyone happy with that? Carried. Thank you. And is this item carried on the agenda? Carried. Thank you very much, Councillor Devine. Moving on to the last item on agenda clearing is the additional item by Councillor Dudas, and I want to thank you. Our East End colleagues, thank you. First of all, can we waive the rules of procedure to suspend to considering the following motion of February 27, 2025 at Public Works and Infrastructure Committee, rolls off the tongue, meeting so we can resolve this in a timely manner. Is this item carried? Great. Councillor Dudas?
Thank you very much, Chair. Being that this is the first time this has been read in, I will read it. I don't have much to add other than what's in this, so I will read. Whereas the city's speed zone policy currently dictates the speed of Ottawa roadways and has not been updated since its establishment in 2009. Whereas staff are updating the speed zone policy to align with current best practices for establishing speed limits based on the Safe Systems approach to road safety, with a report to Public Works and Infrastructure Services Committee planned for late 2025. Whereas within a 5-kilometer stretch of Jeanne d'Arc Boulevard between Vineyard Drive, Fortune Drive, and 10th Line Road, the speed zone changes 2 times west to east from 60 kilometers to 50 and then to 40. And whereas in addition to these speed zone changes, there's also a school zone in front of 2 of the schools, which reduce speeds to 40 kilometers during school hours within the westernly-most 60-kilometer section. I know it sounds confusing, it is. Whereas there is a lack of harmonized speed across this section of Jeanne d'Arc, causing confusion for transportation users within the corridor, and clarity is necessary to promote compliance. Therefore, it be resolved that staff undertake a review of the speed zone changes along Jeanne d'Arc Boulevard North to assess the feasibility of harmonizing the speed limits in consultation with the ward councillors, myself and Councillor Matt Luloff, using preliminary findings from the ongoing speed zone policy update, and be it further resolved that staff consider any possible changes to harmonize speeds in advance of presenting the updated speed zone policy to committee and to council.
Okay, so I see some hands, so I'm going to have to hold this item then. Sorry, Glenn. We were all excited about that in the east, but I guess we'll wait. So we'll put that on the agenda. It is on the table. Oh, I'll get you just to lower your hand. Thank you. So we have that as an item. And IPDs, we have the 3 IPDs. We do have a notice of motion that we'll deal with later on. So we'll go back to the first of 2 items that are held. First item is the Green Fleet Strategy. We have Neil and Jennifer and Layla. We have the whole team here. This is great. Hey, Nicole. It's like the environmental army. It's terrific.
Or an episode of Family Feud.
Family Feud.
Well, thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee members. My name is Lila Gibbons, and I'm the Director of Fleet Services. I'm joined here today with Neil Grandy, who's the Manager of Fleet Maintenance and Technical Services. Neil spent the last year or so working on closely with our consultant on the Green Fleet Strategy, as well as our partners across the city. So we're very happy to be here today to present this to you. I'm also joined by our partners in the Climate Change and Resiliency team. So to my left, Nicole Hoover, who's the director of that team. And then to my far right, we have Alyssa Lansfield, who's a program manager of climate change or climate mitigation team. So as I mentioned, we are very excited to be here today to present to you the Green Fleet Strategy for the city for your review and approval. La stratégie de la flotte verte est une stratégie compréhensive qui est réalistique.
This is a comprehensive strategy that is very realistic. We have an agile approach that is proposed for zero emission technologies for the next 20 years. We will remain attentive to the evolution, the progression of technologies and market.
Comprehensive strategy that is both realistic and achievable for the City of Ottawa. The plan takes an agile approach in transitioning our municipal fleet to low carbon and zero emission technologies over the next 2 decades, and ensures that we continue to remain responsive to the ever-changing technologies and the market conditions. So I will turn the mic over to Alyssa, who will start with our presentation. Thank you.
All right, we're going to do something a little bit different and stand up for this, if that's okay. So my name is Alyssa Lansfield. I'm here from the Climate Change and Resiliency Services group here at the city. I'll speak really briefly to the alignment of this strategy with some of our corporate objectives, and then I'll pass it off to my colleague to speak to the details of the strategy. So next slide, please. So I'd like to say that, first of all, this strategy is well aligned with our approved strategy under the Climate Change Master Plan, under Energy Evolution as well. This is one of our priority projects under that strategy, so we're really pleased to be bringing it forward. And then, of course, this is a great example of successful interdepartmental collaboration between fleet services and other departments to help drive council strategic priorities as well. So specifically, a city that's green and resilient, and specifically that Objective 16 to reduce emissions of our corporate operations. Next slide, please. So as a refresher, we have our corporate targets. The ultimate goal here is going to be to reduce GHG emissions from our city fleet vehicles by 100% by 2040. And as you'll see in the details today, when I hand it off to Neil, that the Green Fleet Strategy represents a significant progress towards that target. It brings us to about 93% emissions reductions by 2040. And I think I want to echo the message that Lila gave, which is that this strategy represents an agile, financially sustainable, and realistic strategy that helps us meet our operational objectives, but also meet our targets. So really pleased to be bringing this forward. Pass it off to you.
Thank you very much. As Lana mentioned, I'm Neil Grandy, Manager for Fleet Maintenance and Technical Services, and I'll take you through the green strategy today. Next slide, please. So before we start talking about the green strategy specifically, let's take a look at what city-owned municipal fleet is made up of today. And today it's made up of 2,815 vehicles or units. And those, of course, are fueled vehicles, diesel, gasoline, that type of thing. out of that 2,815 units, we have 251 of those today, which are already a green solution or a green option. 69 of those are electric, and 182 of those are hybrid. And as we've seen from past green fleet plans, what fleet currently does now is it's operationalized the idea of always looking at a green option or a hybrid type option whenever we are life cycling or replacing a vehicle. Of course, that always meet operational needs. And you're going to hear me say a couple phrases a lot throughout this presentation, which are, of course, our operational needs, and everything is based on what we know today. And it's why the agile approach that we're going to propose here is why it's such a key part to our long-term success here. So next slide, please. So in developing the Green Fleet strategy, we put together a number of objectives. And of course, the first one is to have an agile approach. And by agile, what I mean is we have set intervals outlined throughout the duration out through to 2040, where we are reviewing technology on a regular basis and then looking at which technology makes sense for us operationally and that are incorporating that into our strategy and into our modeling and making sure that we are using the most relevant up-to-date technology to achieve the goal as Alyssa had outlined here. Beyond that, we want to take a look at, well, let's assess what low carbon technologies actually are in the market today. And then beyond that, we'll take a look at how do they map directly onto fleet and what will fleet's transition out through to 2040 look like. And we call that our maturity plan, if you will, and maturing the fleet. Beyond that, when we know the technology, we're going to have to fuel it. So of course, we're going to want to take a look at what energy supply planning are we going to need to do for it, as well as take a look at forecasting our capital costs and our operating costs, and then really wrap that all up into what our GHG reduction potential is going to be. To do this, we utilized a number of inputs. Of course, as I mentioned, past green fleet plans, as well as our GHG inventory that was done from 2020. We used, of course, our existing asset inventory that we have right now and the life cycling that we have for our current assets, the operational requirements from the different service areas that we have. We looked at our capital and operating costs, and as well a number of stakeholder consultations, both at the beginning and at the end when we developed this overall report and the legislative report that was put forward. At the end, we wrap that up really into our overall action plan to transition the city to its low carbon future and really working towards zero emissions by 2040. And I'll take you through that now. So next slide, please. So the green strategy itself, it's made up of 5 different areas that I'm going to talk about. We have our current condition assessment, which is based on if we simply replace basically like for like. We'll show you what that modeling looks like to help us understand what our overall potential is going to be. Then we took a look at what low carbon techs actually are available in the market today and what makes sense for us to incorporate as part of our strategy. We'll talk agile, of course, and what our pathways are going to look like. We'll take a look at what fleet will transition and what the makeup will be by 2040. As well, we'll take a look at what energy supply and refueling infrastructure is going to make sense for us, of course, out to 2040. And then we'll look at what our cost benefit analysis is going to show. So next slide, please. So I know there's a lot on this slide, so we'll go through it. The big thing is right now, when we look at replacing like for like today, by 2040, we do see a reduction in GHG. And that is simply because of natural improvements in technology and as well things like clean fuel legislation. We will naturally see a reduction of approximately about 18% by 2040. And that's if we just continue to replace like for like. But 18%, of course, is not the objective for it. We want to be 100% below 2012 target. And as you can see on the graph in front of you there, the maroon bar, and as well, there's a bit of a salmon color bar underneath that. That is really where we start to need our focus on, and you'll understand why as we get going. But that is actually all heavy duty vehicle related GHG emissions. And of course, those are things like snowplow and collection unit, large off-road equipment, things like that. Is where that GHG comes from. And it's why, as we get moving forward through the strategy, we need to have such a heavy focus on ensuring that we are looking at heavy duty, medium and heavy duty vehicles for GHG opportunities to be able to reduce it. So if we go to the next slide. So when we start now to take a look at what technologies make sense, we took a look at 9 different technologies that were in the market today. Things like battery electric vehicle, hybrid. We looked at compressed natural gas, renewable natural gas, biodiesel, renewable diesel, and as well fuel cell technology. Of all of those different technologies that we really looked at, battery electric always ranked really the most favorable tech that we want to be using today. And of course, as you'll see from our key takeaways, of course, we will continue to integrate battery electric into our light vehicle fleet. But outside of that, things like plug-in electric hybrid vehicles and also hydrogen fuel cell vehicles really rose to the top as being predominant technology that we want to look at. And especially when we talk about medium duty and heavy duty vehicles, it's where we get into now our fuel cell forecasting through 2030. And that's where fuel cells really do emerge as our strong contender for heavy duty vehicles beyond really 2030. And then from 2033 beyond, we forecast using a dual technology approach, again, battery electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles in combination to really be able to bring down our overall GHG. So key takeaways from when we look at our technology is battery electric, of course, for light vehicles, and medium and heavy duty will be a combination, of course, where they meet operational needs. We will look at battery electric and as well fuel cell vehicles. So we go to the next slide. Now we look at our pathways. Today, we are on what we consider ourselves on a reduced emissions path. And we say reduced emissions because we are already integrating in electric and hybrid vehicles currently into fleet today. So we are on what we call reduced emission. Now, when we look at the next 3 to 5 years, it's where there's really a predicted pivotal market review that will need to be done based on emerging technologies such as overall fuel cell technology. And from that review, we will shift on to what we call the towards zero emission path, where we will be utilizing dual technology, both battery electric and fuel cell vehicles, in order to support our goals by 2040 or for 2040. Go to the next slide. So here, as I mentioned, we are on what we consider the reduced emissions path today. And as you can see, if we continue on that, replacing electric or integrating electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles into our fleet today, we do forecast a 38% reduction out by 2040 in GHG. So again, significant improvement over our 18%. However, it's still not where we want to be. And we want to be as close as we can be to the 100% target under climate change, under the Climate Change Master Plan. And when we start to incorporate in the dual technology approach, both battery electric and fuel cell vehicles, especially where we focus on the medium duty and heavy duty for fuel cell integration, then you can see we are able to really achieve an overall modeled 93% reduction in GHG. And it's because we can target the heavy duty vehicles, which do produce such a significant amount of GHG. We go to the next slide. So now that we understand what our GHG reduction is going to look like, let's talk about what fleet itself is going to look like. And as I mentioned, of course, we want to be integrating dual technologies, both battery electric and fuel cell vehicles, which really do have a significant focus on medium and heavy duty vehicles. And if you look at out through to 2040, you can see we do forecast based on what we know today. Fleet will be made up of approximately 75% battery electric vehicles and 13% fuel cell vehicles. So the 13% fuel cell vehicles are focused really on medium duty and heavy duty vehicles. Again, where it makes operational sense, supporting things like potentially 24/7 operation, things like that. Now, that's not to say that there wouldn't be opportunities for electric, and we do incorporate some medium duty and some heavy duty electric options. But again, it's as we assess and ensure that it meets operational needs. But ultimately, we forecast 75% battery electric and 13% fuel cell. But at the end, there is still 12% internal combustion engine or an ICE. And that is because this is based on what we know today. And there are simply vehicles that there isn't an option today. Things like a loader, things like a grader, things like that. We simply do not have an option that is viable right now in the market. And it's why an agile approach is such a key part of the long-term success here out through to 2040. Because when we do our, as I showed earlier, our next 3-year or our next 5-year overall review, we may find something that is more relevant to the city that does meet its overall operational need, and then we model that into our overall plan. So the plan stays agile throughout the duration of when we do it. Now, that's not to say that fleet will wait for its 3 or 5 years time frame in order to find this technology. We were constantly looking for technologies that really make sense to incorporate into our overall business and help support meet the operational needs of our partners that we support. But at the end of the day, it's again why agile is so important, and it's why the dual strategy approach utilizing battery electric and fuel cell vehicles is such an important part. Because as you can see, 41% of GHG production alone is through just the heavy duty vehicle focus. So it's why we really need that heavy focus on medium and heavy duty vehicles. So we go to the next slide. So now that we know what fleet is going to look like, of course, we're going to have to fuel that. We're going to have to power that. And we do that, of course, looking at the overall charging infrastructure. And fleet is already working or continues to work with its partners in facilities to make sure that fleet's needs and the electrification needs based on this strategy, of course, are incorporated into any of the site reviews or any of the site upgrades that are currently being discussed across the city. Beyond that, of course, this strategy gives the city its overall long-term roadmap, and of which hydrogen will be a part of that long-term success. It gives us the foresight to be able to plan for fueling infrastructure that we would need to start pretty much in 2028, because it is forecasted to be approximately about 4-year period in order to build a hydrogen generation and fueling station within the city, is what's currently targeted. And we want to be ready by approximately 2031 to make sure that we are in line with the emergence of those particular vehicles in the market. And as I mentioned earlier, 2033 and beyond is really where we see that heavy focus, if you will, on medium duty and heavy duty availability for that type of technology, which help us achieve our 93% reduction. So next slide. So what's presented is a realistic plan to allow us to be able to really transition fleet to a low carbon and work towards zero emission by 2040. It's a very responsive plan, especially with the agile approach to where we are continually reviewing technology as it emerges in that market and building it into our plan. So we are not looking to make one decision today and then carry that forward for the next 15 years. So we want a strategy that can adjust and that can pivot based on where technology is going to take us to ensure that we can achieve our goals and be successful. When we look at our overall spending and the cost benefit here, of course, we do have our baseline cost up there. The important piece is when we look at towards zero emission today, to go the zero emission path, we do not forecast spending any additional money beyond what's already forecasted to be spent as part of the baseline. So what we are doing is we are simply taking money from maintenance savings, because electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles are simpler. It's simpler, but it's still, there's less moving parts overall in those vehicles. So there's less overall maintenance cost for those types of vehicles, as well you're going to save on fuel cost. So we will take maintenance cost and fuel cost and more or less transition it over into capital cost. That's not to say that there will not be points in time potentially for capital requests in order to do infrastructure. But when we look at it overall, the overall cost balance out so that we are not spending any additional money beyond what we currently forecast to spend through 2040. Next slide. So in summary, of course, we want to be on the zero emission path or working towards that zero emission path using an agile strategy, which incorporates both battery electric and fuel cell vehicle technology through to 2040 to help us achieve our 93% reduction in GHG while saving approximately about $6.5 million through 2040. Now, that's not an annual savings, that is a total savings. We'll go to the next slide. If we look at hydrogen and what we're currently doing right now, we are currently looking at setting up a pilot infrastructure right now to be able to fuel test vehicles, to be able to pilot with our service area partners. That's currently in work right now. And then beyond that, we've identified 3 other types of technologies that we want to look at. One is an add-on type of fuel system, which can work with light vehicles. Again, it will actually integrate hydrogen into gasoline lines in order to better blend the types of fuels that we're using in order to get both GHG reduction and fuel reduction. Next is actually a true dual fuel system, which we would use on heavy duty vehicles. And again, that will blend hydrogen and diesel together in order to get up to a 60% reduction in GHG as well as fuel usage. And then beyond that, we have true fuel cell vehicle or hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. We've already had conversations with respect to manufacturers who do produce that product for the direct market. And actually, we were fortunate enough to have a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle actually in the city last year. And I was fortunate enough to be able to drive that. So it was quite a very, very neat opportunity. So anyway, very positive with respect to that. So anyway, so we do have a lot of exciting things on the go with respect to hydrogen, certainly to be able to test that and showcase that in the city so that the city can really be seen as a leader and true innovator with respect to that type of technology. We go to the next slide. Finally, Ultimately, we'll look at 3 recommendations for you today. Of course, to approve the green strategy as it is outlined in the report, to approve the adoption of that agile implementation framework that for this green strategy. And then third recommendation is really to direct staff to complete that initial comprehensive review of technology in the next 3 to 5 years. So thank you very much for your time.
That's the presentation. That's a presentation. Thank you very much. That was really good. Yeah, thank you. That was terrific. Yes, bravo, bravo. No, honestly, 15 years, I've never seen this before, and it speaks to how excited. Yes, very good. I could sit down now, right? Okay, no, that was really good. So I really appreciate it. And we have lots of questions, very exciting strategy. Just a quick heads up, I was quite a nerd when I was younger, but I also had a very cool side. And I actually built a hydrogen engine in grade 10. So I know quite a bit about hydrogen production. And you know, back when it wasn't efficient, my school teachers weren't happy when I fired it in the school lab because it didn't go totally perfect. But nonetheless, I think you're balancing what we see today with what is definitely, it's not like Jetson's future. We've been talking about this for decades. It's been about hydride cells and the ability to be able to work with it safely and to get the right price point. And as we know, fossil fuels have gotten so expensive, to have something that doesn't pollute is definitely a good alternative for heavy vehicles. Just a side note, I know that Councillor Johnson and Councillor Trotz is fully aware of some of the great work with the FCM and the SCC. We've had presentations about the Edmonton Hydrogen Generation Hub. It could be the largest hydrogen production in North America, and it's done in conjunction with Invest Canada. It's also part of an Indigenous effort with the Indigenous people. So I definitely see this as the future for heavy vehicle operation. So I commend you at really getting into it, and I hope you enjoyed driving the vehicle as well. So I'll move right to the questions. First up, Committee Member DeRoche.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Maybe I missed this, but could you just outline what vehicles you're talking about? Are we talking like paramedic, fire, snowplows, the pickup trucks? Like what's the products that we'd be purchasing?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question. Right now, what we had focused on is the overall fuel type that we're going to use. But yes, it does include the complete city fleet is what we analyzed in this. So that would include fire trucks and ambulances and things like that. Again, our focus would be on selecting the right zero emission technology that meets operational need.
Okay. And as part of that process, what's the emphasis that will be placed on the reliability of those vehicles? Because these are vehicles that when the power goes out, when there's a crisis, when there's a big storm, they need to be there.
Absolutely.
And on the job. So reliability really needs to be key to
absolutely
accepting a product.
You know, very good points. And it's why anything that we would do, we would ensure that vehicles meet the operational needs, and we would look to do testing and piloting with our service partners to make sure that they are perfectly satisfied. And of course, take in those operational needs such as 24/7 requirement.
Right, because our experience to date, we'll see how we'll do with the electric buses. And, you know, I think that decision was really based heavily on the subsidy that we were getting from the federal government. And I'm very hopeful that the reliability will be there. We see with our electric train, that is quite pathetic at times. The diesel train looks like it's doing okay right now. But our experience to date with electric, you know, is a concern. So especially with these vehicles which need to be there when there's emergencies. So I appreciate the assurance that reliability will be a key part of this. The other piece of this, and to me, this is a great presentation, but it's under normal circumstances that we have good trade patterns. We can purchase vehicles potentially in other jurisdictions in other countries like the United States. And Council just approved a motion saying we need to look at buying more Canadian. And I don't think I'm exaggerating, but I'm very concerned that we're not going to be in a normal situation that we can acquire vehicles from friendly allied countries, right? Given what's happening right now. So how does that council motion that we passed, that we're going to be looking at how we can focus on Canadian technologies, how does that affect potentially this strategy? Are there Canadian sources, for example, that we could benefit from?
Mr. Chair, I'll take that because I've been closely tied to the tariff issue. So that is just like every other piece of business that we're doing right now in the city. We got a really close pulse on the outcome of tariffs, the outcome and impacts on the very integrated and complex supply chain. So that will be part of my regular updates as we move forward. And as part of that, commitment that I made with bringing those informations back to committee and council on all areas of the city operations, whether it be large construction projects down to the purchasing of a fleet vehicle and where that's manufactured. You heard me say at council last week or 2 weeks ago, it's very complex when it comes to vehicles because there's the majority of the chassis in the system are made in the US, and there's scenarios where a chassis in the US comes over to Canada. We put the Lego top back on, and there's scenarios where that goes back to the US to put the other Lego pieces on it, and then it comes back to Canada and we buy it from a vendor. So it's a very integrated, complex scenario that it's something that we're watching very, very closely, depending on what happens at the outcome south of the border.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's a great system right now. And I hope it continues, right? That collaboration between Canada and the United States. But I'm very concerned. I know you talk about agility of the strategy. We're going to need a lot of agility because if we get into some very dark days where the economy is essentially wrecked because of tariffs or, very unfriendly policies in the United States, there's going to be some real pressures on this strategy, I think, to come up with the products that we're talking about. Again, I think the presentation relies on kind of normal circumstances, which I hope will continue, but we'll see how that progresses. And again, agility will be key to that. Thank you, Chair.
Committee member Truster.
Thank you so much, Chair. So I neglected to ask you this when you gave me the personal briefing. We've had a really successful pilot with Purelator in Centertown for small scale deliveries on Centertown streets with e-cargo bikes. It seems to me this could be something really cool. I don't know, maybe for like gardening staff that are like bringing soil and flowers in the neighborhood. I didn't see e-cargo bikes listed in some of your potential vehicles, but is that something you thought about just for small scale deliveries in local neighborhoods?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, we've had this conversation a little bit earlier today. Within the strategy itself, it falls within light vehicles. So in the strategy, you may have seen some of the examples of vehicles that we use. Currently, it's not a vehicle that we use, but we certainly are considering it, particularly through our fleet service review and our fleet transformation, looking at right-sizing vehicles. So there are some great opportunities with the low-speed utility vehicles in some of our very large city facilities that have units on site that really just work on site. So absolutely.
Yeah, like from my perspective, the Purelator pilot's been really successful, and I cheer every time I see the bikes go by because they're really cool. They're quiet, they're small, and they're just really handy, and they're slow, which is good in residential neighborhoods where there's schools and stuff like that nearby, and it's right beside a school. So I just want to say I've heard no complaints about the Purelator pilot, and I'd love to see those kinds of vehicles experimented with as a city, because I mean, that really costs nothing. Like you just plug them in, and it's amazing how much you can carry in some of those electric box bikes. So thank you. And also thank you. I can see how much pride you take in this strategy, how excited you are to roll it out. It's infectious, and thank you for all your work. We really appreciate it.
Great. Councillor Committee Member Devine, and it's funny, he wasn't quick enough on the Jeopardy button. He has actually raised this with Lila and the group about exactly what you said, Councillor Troster. So do you wish to expand on that, Councillor Devine?
Well, I'm not just a one-trick pony. I got plenty of stuff I want to ask about. Not that you're a one-trick pony.
Multitudes.
Yeah, we're all many ponies, many tricks. So thank you very much for this presentation. I really enjoyed the briefing that I had with you, where I first saw staff stand up for a presentation. What an idea. I love that. So I'm very enthusiastic about the plan and the objectives that staff have laid out for this strategy. I also see it as an integral way of the city being able to live up to our commitment of trying to achieve as much as we can within the corporation, because we've had that direction that we can't necessarily go out to the community and make change, but we can take responsibility within. So before, and yes, I do have questions on what my colleague, Councillor Troster, was saying, but before I get to that, so with regards to the agile nature of the plan, and one thing I heard you say is that there are many elements of this plan where we don't necessarily have to commit to a massive capital investment. And I know that my colleagues in solid waste understand, the pressures that come from having to make a major decision on something like that, which still is sometimes things that we must do. But if I understand correctly, and kind of to speak to what my colleague Councillor DeRoche was saying, is one part of or one advantage of the agile nature of this plan is that you can focus in the short term on the improvements you can make to our light duty vehicles while waiting for and exploring technologies that may allow us to incorporate changes to our heavy duty vehicles should those technologies present themselves.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, and I because there are so many complexities to the fleet, I appreciate that agility can help us, tackle the low-hanging fruit now while we can, while planning for implementation should they come. As to the financial aspect of it, and I remember asking this question during my briefing, when you laid this out, my worry was like, egad, how much is this going to cost us? Because for so many of our asset management plans, that is the question. But if I understand you correctly, you were saying, and Cyril, this may be a question for you, but you were saying that over the long-term implementation of this plan, while there may be times of significant capital investment here and there, obviously, but you envision that over the term that this will not necessarily result in a net significant increase, that this will play out within current financial planning.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, so the biggest difference in this plan versus our zero emission bus plan, emission bus plan is a very aggressive, big bulk transition.
Yeah,
because the technology exists today. Bear with me, but we have a little bit of a benefit from the fact that we don't have the technology in the big vehicles, so we can't go all in, right? So it's a good strategy where we can, I'll say, get our toes wet, get our knees wet, and move into it. So we're actually transforming a little bit ahead in parallel with technology, which helps with the financial burden of doing a mass transition.
And just to further that, but just as you look at the many points in this plan, like even when you begin, let's say soon, implementing dual fuel lines on some of our vehicles, even some of our, and we talked about bus fleet, that even those capital investments now over the long term of the plan from the fuel savings, that nets out as no great big change to our financial pressures.
Yes, that is correct.
So just to jump a bit on that dual line thing, because if I understand correctly, one thing that you can do soon is for some of our vehicles that are, internal combustion engines, you will have the option or the opportunity to make modifications to those vehicles, whereby adding a parallel fuel line, we can have a vehicle that can be operated by two different fuels. And that can be like a short-term advancement of what would otherwise be a massive capital investment.
Yes, Chair. Yes, that is correct. That is certainly a potential option, and that's what we've talked about today and presented with the dual fuel trial that we want to do.
Great, thank you. Two last things. I'm very excited to hear about the plan that you were describing as starting in 2028, that a new site for a hydrogen fuel facility, but that pilot project will begin this year as a means of advancing that. So very excited about that. So just finally now, just to flesh out what my colleague introduced on the issue of other forms of vehicles. So from the conversations we've had before, I know that other municipalities across North America, including Toronto, have over the last several years incorporated the use of commercial e-cargo bikes and or low-speed vehicles into their municipal fleet. And I certainly appreciate that here in Ottawa, we've passed bylaws that allow for private sector to do that. But separate from the green fleet strategy, so Lila, you were talking about our fleet service review, where as I understand it, that is a program where you have the scope to transform our municipal fleet as may fit our other objectives. So can you just explain within the objectives and scope of the fleet service review, does that give you the option of exploring other innovations, other kinds of vehicle use for the right sizing of our fleet, whether it be for e-cargo bikes or low-speed vehicles or anything of that like?
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely. So through our fleet service review, which we've been doing over about the last 2 years, we've actually have a number of initiatives in place where we are looking at right sizing our vehicles. We're looking at standardizing our vehicles and other options where we can help build capital room in our capital budgets in order to replace our vehicles. So this is absolutely an option where we can look at whether it's electric e-cargo bikes or more particularly, the smaller electric utility vehicles like you see with Purolator. I'll give you a great example of something that we're looking at. Neil last year went to the Gatineau Expo and actually saw some of those utility vans or utility units where they have different backs to them. So a location like Ropac, that is a very large city facility, if not our largest, have a number of units on site that work strictly on site. Right now, there are, I think, 2 or 3 pickup trucks. So we are actually looking at the potential of bringing in those low speed utility trucks to replace maybe the pickup trucks that are there. So it'll be fully electric. It is something that we're looking at right now as we look at our replacement plan going forward. So absolutely, is that part of our fleet service review? It really is part of our fleet transformation on how we're looking at what's the best vehicle to do the job for our operations. And that's where we're right sizing and standardizing.
Perfect. Thank you. As that program is ongoing, and I know it'll span several years, I very much appreciate the work you've done here. I look forward to having further conversations with you about it. And if and when I come to your office to speak to you, I might stand for about 5 seconds, but then I'll sit because otherwise it gets really awkward, Neil. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Devine. Committee Member Gower.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. Building on what my colleague was asking earlier about the tariffs, I think this is a huge opportunity for the provincial and federal governments to be investing in manufacturing of municipal fleet vehicles here in Canada. And I hope it's something that we see whether or not tariffs are imposed. I think it would be really important and beneficial to cities like Ottawa and many others that are making this change. But I wanted to ask on that the report does mention some federal and provincial funding programs that we've already been able to tap into, and it sounds like you're anticipating more. What do we know, or what have we heard from the province and the federal government about opportunities over the next 15 years?
So in 2023, we were already awarded $247,000 to go towards the implementation of electric charging infrastructure. By the end of last year, we put another application into NRCan. We're expecting to hear an announcement very shortly where we're fully expecting to receive another fairly large amount of money to go towards electrification of our fleet. We do continue to regularly review all programs that are coming through. We have had conversations with FCM, and their next funding opportunity is actually going to have a little bit more focus on hydrogen. So we are just waiting to see when that gets released so that we can put an application in. But it is something that we are going to be regularly doing as a team alongside our colleagues in the Climate Change Master Plan team who are helping us review any kind of funding opportunities that come through in order to help reduce some of that tax burden in the short term on our residents of Ottawa. So we will continue to do that. Like I said, right now it's NRCan and FCM that have been the two at the forefront. We're hoping to see more come forward over the next few years.
And how do they fund it? Is it a percentage of cost, or is it, how do they structure their funding?
It usually is a percentage of cost up to a certain amount. So I think I'm just going to use the last FCM application process, which we didn't qualify for at that one, but it was up to $200,000 towards planning or putting a strategy together where we were already ahead of that. The next one that we believe is coming forward is going to have a much higher number, but it's usually a split, whether it's a 50-50 split, an 80-20 split. There's usually a percentage where the city has to show that they have the funding to support it, and then they supply a grant on top of that. And we have the capital budgets through our replacement plan and through our partners in the climate change resiliency team to be able to support some of those applications that are going through.
That's good. It'd be nice to see them introduce programs like they did for transit, right? It was hundreds of millions of dollars and access to low interest loans, very favorable terms for the city. And on OC Transpo, I wanted to ask, I know OC Transpo is not part of this report, but I'm sure you are collaborating with them. What lessons learned, or can you share anything that may have changed our strategy or approach so far based on OC Transpo's experience over the past couple of years?
No, thank you, Chair. So we definitely had some conversations with them to get some of the lessons learned. And I think what we have seen, and I think it comes down to their funding strategy and how it came forward. It really was a big chunk that they were biting off in one at one time.
Mhm.
We absolutely have, as Cyril mentioned, the ability to take this in smaller chunks and be able to implement green infrastructure as it becomes available. So one of the lessons learned definitely is not to put that strategy in place now and just follow through with that same strategy right through. Hence the agile approach that we've put into this strategy, which is really going to help us develop as technologies develop and as market conditions change. So that's one of the, I think, lessons learned that we've taken out of it. We still do have conversations with them. We do support them on their non-revenue fleet. So looking at ways that we can, whether it's entering into pilot programs with them. Neil is going to Edmonton in April to actually have conversations with the city of Edmonton because they have been successful so far in implementing the dual fuel system with their transit vehicles as well as their solid waste vehicles. So we're going to take some lessons learned there and bring it back and have those conversations with transit to see if they do want to partner with us on some trials going forward.
Okay, good. I was also glad to hear my colleague raise the question about cargo bikes, e-cargo bikes. So they fit into the light vehicle category. I do think it's something that should be called out more explicitly in the strategy in the report, because I don't think it was mentioned. This is something that EnviroCenter had flagged. I'm glad the city's integrating that, but I think it's important for the public to see where we're at with that strategy. I was also curious, I think, anyone who's visited Europe recently sees a lot of smaller municipal vehicles, smaller garbage trucks, smaller fire trucks, partly perhaps because their streets are narrower and in denser areas, but I think they're also doing it from an environmental point of view. And I was wondering if looking ahead 15 years, is our fleet going to look substantially different? Are we going to have similar vehicle types as part of our mix?
No, thank you for that, Chair. We're definitely looking, and this goes back to our fleet transformation and the continuous improvement. So we're continuously looking at what vehicles we need to do the job. It's not necessarily the biggest and the best. We're looking at our 15-minute neighborhoods now, and a lot of our equipment is too large for those 15-minute neighborhoods. So we're starting to really look at what units do we need in our fleet. So yes, we are hoping that we're going to see a bit of a transition. We have for many years have been buying like for like, and we're going to start moving away from that. Our questions have changed from what vehicle do you want to what is the job that you're going to be doing with that vehicle and what area are you servicing, so that we can now come back with recommendations on what's the best size of vehicle, what's the best type of vehicle that should be utilized in those situations. So we're hoping that we're going to see some change because our communities are changing and the infrastructure that we're supporting is changing.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Committee member Bradley. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chair, and thanks to staff for the presentation. I fully support the greening of our fleet, and I'm excited to see what new technologies become available. But having said that, I share similar concerns to my colleague with respect to reliability and performance, specifically with the heavy vehicles. The light vehicles were already there. I see that as an easy transition. It's the heavier vehicles I'm more curious about. And I might be getting into the weeds here, but how did our operational staff help to inform this strategy?
Thank you very much, Chair, for the question. Our operational partners were informed of the strategy through, first, of course, the questionnaire up front, where each service area identified a representative to be included in it. And then also each service area had an opportunity to review the overall draft strategy, provide their comments. We did an iterative approach with respect to that, and as well the legislative report.
And have any departments from an operational perspective flagged concerns with transitioning heavier vehicles in particular to new technologies?
Again, thank you, Chair, for the question. I think the concerns, of course, are similar in terms of obviously reliability and wanting to meet operational needs. But of course, we would never, just out of principle, transition a vehicle to a technology that would not meet the overall operational need. We will continue to work with those partners to make sure that we are testing and trialing equipment that make sure that it meets their overall operational need, especially in situations where we have 24/7 requirement. We wouldn't transition anything just for the sake of it. It has to meet the need.
So could you, again, maybe too into the weeds at this stage, because I know the heavier vehicles are later out, but like we're going to be doing testing when a new technology for snowplow comes available. We will test it before we procure an entire fleet. Will we get any type of report back on how it's performed, where its weaknesses were, where its strengths were, just so that before we make this significant capital investment and transformation that we're not going to run into issues?
So I think this falls in line with our regular reviews. We will be looking at what technologies are available. We will be looking at what kind of pilots we will be running. And those are great opportunities to maybe report back into council on what we've learned. But we also, through the budget process, we provide the fleet vehicle and equipment replacement and growth plan. And in that document, we do provide an update each year on the greening of our fleet. So we can add a little bit more to that to give you some information as to how the pilots are faring, and see if we are introducing it into the fleet.
Great, thank you. And forgive me because I don't know much about these new technologies and what they require and how they work. So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert there, but I do know that often they require new infrastructure to fuel them, whether it be a charging station, et cetera. And I'm not sure how the hydrogen plays into that. So how do we make those capital investments to support this green fleet while the technology is still so evolving? Because that has to come first. So how does that play into this strategy?
So I think that's exactly why we are running with the agile approach. Right now, we're really focusing on technology that is tried and tested, and it's readily available in the market. So with the light fleet, we are looking at electrifying the majority of our light fleet where it meets operational requirements. We have a plan in place right now over the next 3 years because, like I said, we did receive some funding to help support the electrification of our vehicles. It's when we get to hydrogen, this is where we're very excited. Is it a bigger capital investment? Absolutely. But as Neil says often, hydrogen reacted the same 100 years ago as it reacts today, as it will react in 100 years. So the funding that we put in place for hydrogen infrastructure is not going to have a significant change. We do have to make sure that we stay on top of the market to understand the electrification side of things, because battery technology does change fairly significantly throughout the years. So that's something that we do have to keep on top of, and we will make sure that we're always staying current with what is available in the market.
Okay, and then just last question. I know we went over this in our one-to-one briefing, but 2040 is only 15 years away, and it feels ambitious to me to transform our entire fleet by then, particularly when some of the technology for heavier vehicles doesn't exist. So how will you update committee and council on your progress on this transformation as we approach 2040?
Again, we can do it in two fashions. We can do it through, as we do now, through the fleet vehicle and equipment replacement plan, so through the budget process. Or the other option is when we do our periodic reviews, we will be coming back to council and providing lessons learned and any future direction changes that we will be recommending.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Batley. Committee Member Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just a couple questions. The first one is whether or not, and we discussed this in our one-on-one, but I wanted to ensure that we mentioned it here. What work is your team taking on with the solid waste team as they're planning some of their mixed waste processing on site for the landfill? I'm not a scientist, but I do know that hydrogen is one thing that you might be able to extract from mixed waste use processing. And I'd like to know that we're doing those things, at least talking to each other, because I know that a heavy vehicle is a waste management vehicle. So if they could go and dump their waste and get fueled up and leave again, that sounds very attractive to me.
No, thank you, Chair, for that. I by no means am an expert on that as well, and I'm not sure if Nicole can maybe add a little bit onto that, but we certainly are in conversations with our partners in solid waste to look at what their future plans are for their fuel or gas captures at the solid waste facility. I know you were heavily involved in the solid waste master plan and some of the work that's there. So maybe I'll pass it over to you to see if there's anything that you can add to it. But I'll tell you, we certainly are going to keep those lines of conversation open to ensure that if we can tap into something and help support solid waste with their vehicles, we absolutely will look at that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I was going to say, I think Lila touched on it, but certainly just emphasizing those opportunities to be looking internal, making sure that we're coordinated and we are looking at those opportunities. So I know that the solid waste team will be coming back with a number of substantial recommendations later this year, but certainly something we will continue those offline discussions as opportunities.
Okay, great. I mean, I'm sure there's both cost and benefit to creating a program that is interdependent like that. However, you know, without a doubt, the solid waste master plan is going to be a major ticket item. This also has a capital implication. And so whether there's cost savings that comes from some of those investments, I think those trade-offs would be very interesting to discuss. And it's definitely a very futurist way of looking at what the city can do on its own. You know, I was at an FCM meeting just earlier this week talking about how we really are trying to position the cities as economic drivers for the country. And I see there to be a lot of potential here in the sort of futurist that you're bringing forward in this report, but also with the potential for the solid waste master plan moving forward to really demonstrate that there could be economic benefit to climate action. So I think that's a very exciting proposition. And I just wanted to commend this team for coming to council or coming to committee with a report that says, I know this is what we talked about before, but we think we can do better. I think that this is a very perhaps bold way of approaching committee. And I think that what might even go further to that is this notion of an agile approach. So I note that one of the 3 recommendations being put forward to this committee is to approve an agile approach. Can you tell me what is different about an agile approach to your work versus a different way of planning and organizing your work that would require an additional approval?
I think it was important for us to put that in there because it is how we work today. It's not necessarily how we have always worked. So for us, I think it's very important to highlight that we are going to be taking an agile approach, and we want to take an agile approach. So we don't have all the answers today. We want to be very upfront. We do not have all the answers today to ensure that we're going to meet those targets set out in the climate change master plan. So it's important for us that you're comfortable that we don't have those answers for you today, but we are confident that we can either meet or come close to meeting those expectations. So that's why we thought it was important to put that in as part of the recommendations.
Okay, so for me, this is extremely important. You know, I think in terms of the subject matter of this strategy, I have confidence that this is the right direction. But the manner in which this report is being presented, in being open and transparent about that we are trying to approach this as a learning organization, is something that I think the city has been chastised for in the past. You know, we have a lot of plans that span 25, 30 years, and we can sometimes be accused, and perhaps rightly so, of being fairly dogmatic. Well, we said we were going to do this 15 years ago, and so we must execute the plan. Our budgets look like that. Our long-term master plans look like that. And that's the way we've always done it. That is not actually the way we have to do everything. And I ran on an idea like that. And so for me, this was a very inspiring moment to see a group come and say, in fact, we will be investigating this, and we will be interrogating this, and we will fail perhaps in some places, and we will learn from them. That is what an agile audit is. And this isn't an audit, pardon me, but that is what an agile sort of lean system looks like in a learning organization. So I was very inspired to see that come forward. I wanted to highlight that in my comments today. I wanted to encourage other departments to consider what it might look like. And certainly for my part as a city councillor, I would be very open to further reports that demonstrate an openness and willingness to learn and to modify our choices as the world evolves. Because, dear God, it is not the same world even in 2024 than when I was elected in 2022, and I want to see the city be responsive to that. So thank you for doing this.
Great. Thank you. Vice Chair Kids.
Thank you, Chair. Great presentation, great work. I definitely think this is the right direction for our city, but I do have a number of questions, so feel free to pull the plug on me. I know I sent a lot in advance and we had a good discussion at my briefing, but some of them I think, merit a discussion out loud. So this only applies to city-owned vehicles. The city obviously works with a lot of contractors. So what is the strategy, if any, to bring the contractors into the fold on this?
So thank you for that, Chair. So right now, obviously, our focus is really bringing this into the city's owned fleet. So moving forward, similar to what we did with GPS or Geotab, we brought that into our fleet, and then we work closely with our partners in procurement to ensure that we include it in part of our request for tenders, request for proposals that we send out to our contracted services. So this is something that we would look at as we move forward in the future, is hopefully including it in our whether it's a request for proposal and actually adding points to it so that we can score companies based on their greening initiatives. And it is, as I mentioned in our chat last week, there are a number of the larger companies that are already taking those steps that are moving towards greener infrastructure.
And do we have a sense of how much of our sort of broader fleet is contractors versus city-owned vehicles?
I unfortunately don't have that answer for you at this point in time because we do work with our partners across the city that have their contracted services as well. So I can maybe look into it and get back to you.
Okay, sounds good. I will say I felt that the rural implications section of this report was a little light. So looking for some assurance that in the eventual rollout, there will be a consideration for geography and distance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So in that case there, we consider rural through the operational needs of the service area when looking at transitioning those vehicles. And of course, the technology we presented today for both medium and heavy duty, especially where that will transition, definitely supports the rural. And as we reviewed, would operate just like you would today, a vehicle. But we take that into consideration in discussions with the operational needs with the service areas.
Okay, I guess what my concern is that obviously much greater distances would impact, the ability for battery life, and also if something goes wrong, there is, less. You're going to have to travel a farther distance to get help as well. So that piece I just want to ensure is part of sort of the broader strategy in terms of when the rollout happens.
No, thank you, Chair. It certainly is part of deciding on which technology works best and where. And that's where what Neil was mentioning is it potentially is hydrogen that is the more realistic option, or at least what we know today, the more realistic option when we're dealing with longer distance of travel and reliability in areas that maybe have not the hydro capacity in order to have electric vehicles. So it's definitely the technology that we would consider in different areas.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. In terms of our in-house maintenance expertise, do we have mechanics that can support an EV fleet?
Thank you for that question, Chair. In that case, we are already training our maintenance technicians with respect to EVT classes right now so that they can be certified and are certified to work on electric vehicles. And we will continue that program.
Great. And so I guess the answer is no, not right now, but we will work towards that.
We at this point in time, we have a portion of our maintenance technicians already trained on EV technology.
Okay.
And we are working through the remaining personnel in our department.
Okay. And would our garages require any retrofits to support that?
Thank you for the question. In that case related to EV, there are certain tools or whatnot that we would need in order to secure the individual safety. When we look at hydrogen, of course, we would make sure that we identify any relevant codes and standards and make sure that we would implement any requirements for the maintenance of that vehicle within city garages.
Okay, great. Any concerns from Hydro Ottawa on the grid capacity to support 741 charging stations by 2040?
We're actually working through the chair, we're actually working very closely with Hydro in terms of the grid capacity and where they have capacity now. We've built out our plans to meet current capacities, and we will continue to do that as they build their capacities in different areas across the city. So we are working very closely with Hydro Ottawa. Hydro One, it will depend on whether we are bringing electric infrastructure to the rural areas, or if we'll be concentrating more on hydrogen at that point in time. But those conversations will begin well in advance of implementing any type of electric infrastructure in the rural areas.
Okay, I'll just note, because sometimes people forget there is a large portion of Orleans that is also serviced by Hydro One. So not just the rural area, but to build on Councillor Bradley's question about feedback from operators, I appreciate that there is significant buy-in from senior leadership on this, but how would you characterize, I guess, enthusiasm or apprehension among our operator staff?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to tell you it's getting better. So we do have a number of champions out there that have taken on electric vehicles just to show that they can work in the operations. Recently, last year, Forestry Services took on 3 units. They were apprehensive at first, but we're hearing regularly from them that it hasn't impacted their operations by any means, and that they're confident with the range that they get. We are also making sure that when we are purchasing these vehicles, we are purchasing the extended range for operations on the batteries because of the geography that we cover. And at this point in time, I know bylaw is early adopters on electric vehicles and do want to get more into the electric vehicles. And we have a number of other service areas that have put their hands up and said, we're willing to take some units on. So we do have a number of champions out there, and I think the feel is changing, and that people are actually seeing that these can meet operational needs in a number of circumstances.
Okay, that's very encouraging to hear. Couple more questions, sorry, Chair. To the point earlier about tariffs and Councillor Gower's great point about opportunity, which I agree with. My understanding, though, is that there is limited local EV options. So fair to say that should the tariffs move forward, that will be a significant challenge.
It certainly will be a significant challenge in terms of American manufacturers, but there are a number of non-American manufacturers as well that we will start conversations with if indeed there's going to be a significant impact with tariffs.
Yes, to many things. Okay, thank you. I appreciated hearing lessons learned from OC Transpo. I'm curious how the Auditor General's audit on the climate change master plan recommendations were incorporated in our approach, specifically concerns around budget overruns and delays and the governance gaps.
So I'll speak to a little bit of that. In terms of, so I'm going to start some of the items that came up in that audit in terms of metrics and in terms of governance. We are working very closely with our partners in the climate change resiliency team to ensure that we are in lockstep and that we are working with other partners across the city with similar projects and or projects that support whether it's electrification or other items. Metrics is something that we certainly are working towards to ensure that we have current metrics to be able to understand our progress. In terms of budget overruns, and you mentioned something else.
Governance gaps.
Okay, so the governance gaps we're working on, but in terms of budget overruns, that's something that really falls back into our fleet transformation. We're building we're implementing a number of initiatives within our own business where we're trying to build capacity within our capital budget so that we can deal with either greening our fleet or budget overruns that we're seeing, whether it's going to be through tariffs, whether it's through increased service costs. We are doing a number of initiatives within fleet services that's going to help support that. I think we've talked to you a little bit about some of our ReLife programs where we instead of spending $700,000-800,000 on pieces of equipment, we're spending $300,000 or $400,000 on doing a full ReLife program and saving that extra $300,000 or $400,000 to be put back into the replacement budget where it's better needed.
Okay, oh, sorry, did you want to add?
No, Councillor, the only thing I was going to add, I think actually this strategy is a perfect example of some of our advancements on solidifying that accountability framework and the work that is ongoing with our team related to governance in particular. this is where a perfect example of where those roles and responsibilities within the operational departmental groups with the expertise are taking those recommendations out of the climate change master plan, energy evolution, working alongside us to assess the realisticness as well, a realistic strategy that incorporates all of those various operational considerations, pardon me, that you've seen incorporated within this strategy. So that was the only additional piece I wanted to add there.
Okay, great. That's actually perfect lead into my next question, because I did part of the reason for all my questions is I did note several of the pathways use the word idealistic, but you are confident that this is a realistic plan.
Absolutely. And I think when we look back now, I think I would have rather used the word ideal versus idealistic. So because idealistic seems like that pie in the sky, this is a realistic and achievable plan. And we fully intend to do what we can within our budgets and within extra funding that we can find through other levels of government in order to support it before we bring back any burden to the taxpayers. So yes, it is realistic, and yes, it is achievable.
And you'll be coming back to us in one of the ways you suggested. And I think the horizon is 5 years for sort of a status update.
Well, the initial review is targeted for the next 3 to 5 years, just because we anticipate that there is going to be significant advancement, whether it's in hydrogen or other technologies. So we will come back to committee and council with any further recommendations at that point, hopefully at that point steering towards the zero emission pathway. But your next update will be during the budget process, where we will have a section in the fleet vehicle and equipment replacement and growth plan, which speaks to where we're at today and what our future the next year has entailed.
And if hydrogen adaptation, lags, that would come back to us as well.
Yes, sure.
Okay, thank you. Again, I don't want to sound or I appreciate putting you in the hot seat. I do think this is the direction we need to go in. And I appreciate that there is a desire to be a leader on this. I love that this is agile and we are going to sort of respond as the technology changes and as we learn more information. But, you know, this is a $1.6 billion strategy. And I'm sure there are going to be growing pains, as there always is when we do something new. It's not a reason not to go forward with it. But, you know, I do think that is a reason to apply some scrutiny. So I'm tepid, but do want to congratulate you on all the great work. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Vice Chair. Seeing no further questions, I have one question, and then I just have a quick wrap up. I'll keep it brief, everyone. First of all, again, I think you've done a terrific job. You've identified, light duty blowers, but we're really looking at where the world is going. I've been reminded by my mom just now, it was 36 years ago, I was in Regional Science Fair with my hydrogen engine. So it's not a new technology. There's lots of things around hydrogen that people aren't aware of. I know, and that's why actually I do have a lunch and learn that will be coming up very soon, working with Edmonton Regional Hydrogen Hub, and I know you're going to get the full experience in person. We're establishing the dates for committee members now, and you're going to learn all about hydrogen. And the fact that shops actually really enjoy it as well, because you're still using grease and wheels and bearings. Literally, you're substituting the fuel type. That is something very different. You're not dependent on electric components like we are with our buses that are shipped from multiple places. It's literally taking an environmentally unit that is 3 times the power of gasoline and diesel that only creates water and adapting it to our vehicles. Our dependency, unlike our bus fleet, which I still don't believe we're going to get our buses in, Glenn, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. When it comes to electric buses, we've made the commitment here today that we're looking at our heavy fleet to risk mitigate, to maintain the power of our medium and heavy duty vehicles that have PTOs. PTO is where you have additional devices. It could be a salt spreader where it requires a lot more energy to get the salt out, all those different things. That is part of what we're looking at as the future when it comes to our technology here, when it comes to heavy. So you won't have an asphalt box being towed that's boiling where the battery will die in the truck towing it. We are very hyper aware, like Councillor Bradley says, we want to make sure that those type of vehicles, we're looking at a hydrogen possibility for our fleet.
Yes, Chair, that's correct.
Thank you. And back to my nerdiness. So again, the SCC, the Sustainability Conference we were just at, there was a lot of focus on this from municipalities, and it's not new. There's a lot that have already adapted and changed over to, they've converted to hydrogen. They've taken their heavy vehicles and they've made that conversion already. So it was a sold out conference, 500 people. People are very interested, and it's not just environmental now. Now it's looking at, we want to break away from dependencies where we see tariffs are going to be a big issue in the future and creating our own future. So I'm very proud of that. If you do go to the erh2.ca, that is the Edmonton hub site. They will be presenting a lunch and learn to us, so we learn a little bit more about the long-term success, the big investment that's taken place. And again, the Green Municipal Fund, for those that you don't know, it's managed with FCM. We receive a lot of funding from the federal government. It's a $2.4 billion management of funds that we will have direct access to as municipalities. This is where we're thinking, as I was just at the SCC as the FCM representative, as vice president. And this is where we realize we have to go. Resiliency, focusing on the future, focusing or not playing with new technologies that are having challenges. We are looking at stability and using what we have as a country. So I just wanted to again highlight the great work that you've done on this. It's very hard to get 24 cats around the table, but you've got 12 here today that are applauding your efforts. And I just want to thank you on behalf of the committee. So on this item, is this received or carried, Kelly? It's carried. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate that. And we'll go back to the remaining item on the agenda. Councillor Gower had his hand up in relation to the Councillor Dudas motion. Councillor Gower.
So I don't have any direct concerns with what Councillor Dudas is asking. I just want to make sure, because I have a couple of streets in my ward where I'd like to see some harmonization. Do I need a motion to get staff to look at those, or are they already considering streets, or can we email staff to flag streets that are a concern ahead of this policy?
And again, it's always Pandora's box. So I'll speak to this as chair briefly, because this has been plaguing us in the East End as part of, even though we've been amalgamated so long, there's 4 speed zones in one stretch. If you ever wanted the perception of a cash grab, this would be it. I don't care if they lower it. I don't care what they do with this. But frankly, Councillor Dudas, myself at Luloff and Kitts are simpatico that we feel that we want to wait for the strategy that would return in 2025. But when it's the implementation until 2026, where we have threads of 300-400 people complaining, normalize it, lower it, do something. So certainly I hear what you're saying. If yours has 4 speed zones in one little stretch and you feel it's that concerning, please bring it to me and we'll certainly look at that if you cannot hold tight till the end of 2025.
But I don't need a motion specifically to have staff look at that harmonization.
Oh, great. Did you want to respond to what the schedule is that's currently ongoing?
Yeah, Chair, our plan is to bring the strategy forward later this year. So at that point, we understand that there's a number of locations across the city where there's been an interest in looking at this. That's why we're revisiting the policy. So if there are specific locations, I have no issue with those being provided to staff. To the extent possible, I would ask that we consider that as part of the strategy when we bring it back, so that we're not spending a lot of time in terms of trying to address one-off requests.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hopefully we can count on your support. Councillor Luloff.
So this is an iterative process, this problem that we've had on Jeanne d'Arc, something that Councillor Dudas, Tierney, Kitts, and I have been looking at over the course of the last 6 years. The chair rightly points out there are 4 speed zones in quick succession along this street. When Councillor Dudas and I were first elected in 2018, there were 7 speed zones along this street, 7 speed zones. We understand that it's important that we do everything that we can for the safety of students along this street. When you've got 4 schools along this stretch, 3 in quick succession. But under previous City of Ottawa policy, especially along the stretch in front of Terry Fox, we were able to put up flashing lights that basically said, listen, it's school zone time, okay? So this 50, that's usually 50, is now actually 40, which made it 8 speed zones for a portion of the day. Well, when the ASE went in, those flashing lights went away, and now you're left with a sign that is very, very difficult to read, whether you're doing 40 or 50, depending on what time of day, to try and direct you as to how fast you should be going. This is a major distraction for drivers, because at the 3:45, you're like, oh, what time is it? I have to look. Okay, so I'm reading the sign, right? And now I'm looking at my clock in my car, trying to figure out what speed I'm supposed to be going at. I'm not paying attention to the road. It makes sense to completely harmonize the street so that there are, like, everyone's expectations are there. Predictability is the most important thing on the road for everyone, for cyclists, for pedestrians, for people that are crossing, and for people that are driving. We want people to be acting in a predictable manner. And what we're left with right now is complete unpredictability. You can't even predict how fast you're supposed to be going. It's outrageous. I want to thank Councillor Dudas, Councillor Cherney, Councillor Kitts for continuing this work that has taken quite a bit of time over the last 6 years to try and harmonize the street so that people know what to expect when they pull out onto it. I don't think there's another street in this city that has so many different speed zones. And like before, it was like you could go 70 and then you were in a 50 zone, and then you were in a 60 zone, and then you were in a 40 zone, and then you were back into a 50 zone. And all you're trying to do is get on the highway or walk to school. It was ridiculous. So thank you very much. I look forward to the review and the completion of the review. But as the chair and as the motion brought forward by Councillor Dudas raises, this is a long-standing issue that cannot wait 2 years to get fixed. It's a mess. It's a schmoz. Thanks. Appreciate the work on this.
Thank you for the passion. Councillor Dudas, maybe we'll wait till the end so you can wrap up if that's okay. And we'll go to Councillor DeRoche.
Well, thanks, Chair. And that was my question to staff, is just when is this report coming? I have some concerns, and the residents have concerns in my ward. We have a road, Earl Armstrong, that is an urban cross-section. It was built in 2010 as part of the stimulus funding. The speed limits made sense then, but since that time, you have a high school that's planned, you have some additional retail that's gone in, you have housing on both sides of the road, you have an LRT station at Linebank that doesn't have a park and ride that we want people to walk and feel safe crossing at those intersections. So I will, again, I've been communicating to staff, and I will try and be patient with this report coming forward. I can't promise you, Chair, that I won't be bringing a report forward to deal with it sooner, but I do hope that in preparing this report that there will be some flexibility to respond to local needs. And that's kind of what we had, I thought, 10 years ago, right? And we didn't see things coming to committee. And I think that's why we're seeing so much come to committee, because our current approach, our current strategy doesn't really respond to the local concerns of the councillor and the residents. So I hope we'll have that flexibility. Otherwise, you're going to continue to have reports coming forward. I guess we've seen this term at council. Thank you.
Great points, Councillor DeRoche. Councillor Lowe.
Thanks, Chair. Without droning on for too long, my question then, so it's only the second month of the year, and I think next week's going to be tomorrow. The day after tomorrow is going to be March, and you said this report's coming forward later in 2025. Like, is there a tighter answer than later in 2025?
Yeah, right now we're looking at the fall of this year. The piece here, and we will be engaging with you prior to that, because there is a public consultation component also to the work that we're doing. So it's not something that's going to be landing on your desk without further opportunity to provide input. We're also going to be briefing members of committee in advance of bringing that report forward. So there will be opportunities also to be having further discussions before it even comes to committee.
Okay, no, I'm really looking forward to that because further to the previous points made by at least two counselors, like, in my community, you have 3 or 4 roads that are designed the same but have 4 different speed limits, right? And to Councillor Luloff's point, predictability is important to road safety. I'm familiar with that stretch of John Dark. I drove the 38 a lot. And when it's dark at night, I drove that first trip at 4:50 something a.m. And when it's dark, I remember just going, as soon as I crossed Champlain Street, I just do 60, like whatever. Can't discipline me for it now. But anyway, thank you. Looking forward to supporting this and looking forward to that report. Thanks.
Great, thank you. We'll go back to Councillor DeRoche again, and then we'll go for wrap.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Dudas. Just one last point I should have mentioned. This afternoon, in my new role as Police Services Board, I'll be attending the badge ceremony, and there's a long list of new constables coming on board. And that's going to be key, I think, to responding to the concerns as well. It's not just the limits. We need enforcement. These are streets in many cases where we don't have the ability to put in really effective traffic calming measures. So I'm quite pleased to see that the police are really ramping up their efforts to recruit and have sworn officers that will, I'm sure, be working very hard in the traffic scene. Thank you.
Great. Councillor Dudas.
Thank you very much. I get reams of emails from residents about the confusion on this road. They want to comply with the speed limits, but because it changes so many times, it's just almost impossible for them to wrap their heads around it. And as Councillor Lowe said, if you're driving it, at some point you're like, okay, well, where's it 40? Where's it 60? It's a school day and it's the school zone time. So it's just too confusing, and we want compliance. That's the whole purpose of speed limits. The other thing I wanted to mention too, and particularly about the timing of this is, I and Councillor Luloff, we've been working with staff for a very long time to try to find a resolution to normalizing these speeds in partnership with Councillors Tierney and Kitts. But right now, this road is bookended by LRT stations that are about to open. And so not only do we have multiple speed limits along this stretch of Jean d'Arc Boulevard North, but now we have stations that are going to see a change in the dynamics of that traffic usage and the road usage. So I can't wait for the policy to come out and for us to debate it and all that. We need to prompt staff to come back with some suggestions now. And I wanted to say that Alain and his team have actually been very forthcoming, saying that they're on the precipice of bringing forward some ideas about this road. So this is just to kind of fast track that, knowing that we'll have that change of dynamic on this road. And I look forward to seeing some kind of resolution, so we're not going 40, 60, 50, like all over the place on this street. So I ask for your support, and also for suspending it to allow it on to today's agenda.
Thank you. Very well articulated from a very passionate, not a single. No, yeah, just to highlight, there's a lot of people in the East End. That's why collectively as the Eastern group, the Eastern Bloc, we're speaking to this. It's not my area. This isn't parochial. I'm not saying, hey, I want to change it. No, this is something that has been flagged time and again, where GPSs are not even keeping up with the quick changes of speed. So by the time people are going through it, their GPS could still be saying, oh, it's 60, but you're actually in a 40. Like, take a drive with me. I will drive. Let's go for a drive. And the only reason why it's recognized now is because people think the blinking light is still there. It's been gone forever, but it's in people's minds where we've set all these mishmash of rules. But now that people have to pay, they're becoming more aware, which is good. But I just feel this doesn't pass the sniff test when it comes to, well, I'm the first one out, promoting heavily ASC, slow down. You don't want a ticket? Don't speed. It's very hard to defend when we have a situation like this. So thank you for moving this in a direction that we could look at this quickly, especially with the change of season. It would be very problematic to even address it in the winter of 2025, early 2026. You got to wait till the spring to go do all utility locates again and move things around. We're wasting way too much time. It's not a good situation. So on this, I'm going to call for a vote on this, Cal. I'm waking you up there, sorry. We weren't expecting that. Okay, everyone votes yes. Carried. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, we stand up. Thank you very much, everyone. And You can see the passion on the east on this. On this, we will go, Kel, keep me in line. I believe the only remaining item is Vice Chair Kitts was asked to read a notice of motion in for Councillor Brockington.
Okay, whereas as part of the 2023 budget process, council deferred the widening of the airport parkway until after the transportation master plan update is completed and the Trillium line is operational for 2 years, but approved funding for related works to proceed, including the Walkley off-ramp, roundabout, improvements to Walkley Road, and a new multi-use pathway along the west side of the airport parkway. And whereas new design information has revealed that constructing the MUP on the west side of the airport parkway without concurrently constructing the roadway widening would involve substantial throwaway costs estimated at $870,000 in 2024 dollars. And whereas construction of the multi-use pathway in advance of the airport parkway widening would result in 2 separate construction periods with impacts to adjacent residents such as noise, and whereas the proposed sequencing of works would introduce risk that the newly constructed multi-use pathway surface and adjacent landscaping would likely be damaged during the subsequent widening project. And whereas there is an existing multi-use pathway on the east side of the airport parkway that provides a safe mobility option for pedestrians and cyclists along this corridor, therefore be it resolved that the construction of the multi-use pathway along the west side of the airport parkway be deferred and considered with the airport parkway widening.
Great, so we'll deal with that. It's an inquiry, and then we have our notice of motion as well. Oh, so this is the
That was
inquiry.
the notice.
Okay.
This is the inquiry. Again, moving on behalf of Councillor Brockington. On January 31st, 2025, the Ottawa Police Services released their annual report on vehicle collisions in Ottawa. 5 of the top 20 intersections for collisions are in River Ward, including the intersections that ranked 1st, 2nd, and 5th. Topping the list, Riverside and Hunt Club had seen in recent years a decline from its top spot, as well as a steady decline in overall collisions. Would staff please outline the root causes of the collisions at this intersections? At this intersection, what physical improvements have been made this decade to improve safety, and whether any other changes can be made at this intersection to reduce the number of collisions. In addition, the intersection of Carling at Kirkwood is consistently ranked worst in the city for the number of collisions, ranked 2nd last year. What makes this vast intersection unique is its 2 Queensway off-ramps that contribute to the volume of traffic. Would staff please outline the root causes of the collisions at this intersection, and whether staff can recommend modifications that can be made at this intersection to reduce the number of collisions? Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. And again, thanks to everyone. So we have that was the inquiries. We have no further business. Adjournment of the very first PWIC committee. Next meeting will take place on March 27, 2025. Thank you very much, everybody.